So thank you everyone for coming. This event was organized by the Student Environmental Resource Center, specifically in collaboration between Carbon Crew and our Renewable Energy Education Associate. We are hoping that tonight we can all learn more about our campus energy system and ways we can make it more sustainable.
We would like to begin with the land acknowledgement. We recognize that Berkeley sits on the territory of Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will continue to hold the University of California, Berkeley more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples.
Thank you for that land acknowledgement, Kira. With that, our agenda for this evening includes introductions of the facilitators and panelists, followed by a brief student-led presentation. We'll then move on to a moderated panel discussion and end with an audience-led Q&A. With that, I'll go ahead and introduce myself first. My name is Ashley Cowell. I use the she series pronouns. I work as Serc's Renewable Energy Education Associate, and I'm a junior studying environmental science.
Yeah, I'm Cinder Carlson. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a Norwegian freshman in Carbon Crew. I tend on double majoring in economics and also society and environment.
Hi everyone, my name is Tess. I use she or they pronouns. I'm a third-year conservation resource studies student, and I currently serve as the Carbon Neutrality Engagement Fellow at Serc.
Hello everyone, I'm Kira Wiesinger. I use the she series. I'm also a member of Carbon Crew, and I'm a sophomore majoring in environmental science.
I'll now go ahead and introduce our panelists, and I'd like to thank them for taking the time to be with us tonight, as well as for their work on campus related to these issues. We're first joined by Sally McGarahan, Assistant Vice Chancellor of Facilities with the Capital Renewal Program. We're also joined by Professor David Romps of Earth and Planetary Science, who serves as the Goldman Distinguished Chair in the Physical Sciences and as the Director of the Berkeley Atmospheric Science Center, as well as Kira Stoll, Chief Sustainability and Carbon Solutions Officer with the Office of Sustainability.
Now we will begin a short presentation created by our student moderators. Our other moderators will monitor the chat and try to answer any questions that we can as they come up. Some questions might be better answered by some of our panelists later on during the audience Q&A portion of this event, but we will try to answer what we can. So one major development within the UC's climate action and campus energy plan was the adoption of the UC-wide carbon neutrality initiative. In November 2013, then President Janet Napolitano announced the Carbon Neutrality Initiative, which commits UC to emitting the net zero greenhouse gases from its buildings and vehicles fleet by 2025. The Carbon Neutrality Initiative has two main proportions or components. The first is carbon neutrality by 2025, which entails net zero emissions from Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. For Berkeley, this represents about 80% reduction of overall emissions. So Scope 1 emissions include direct emissions such as natural gas, campus fleet emissions from refrigerants as well. And Scope 2 emissions include the indirect emissions from purchased electricity and also purchased steam. So the second portion of the initiative is the carbon neutrality by 2050. This entails net zero emissions from Scope 3 emissions. These are the remaining 20% of Berkeley's emissions and are primarily associated with transportation. So Scope 3 emissions include optional emissions such as business air travel, student commute, faculty, staff commute, also solid waste and water consumption. So On this next slide, we wanted to highlight this graphic, which is presented in the UC's annual report on sustainable practices, and it was released in 2019. It shows where the UC system as a whole is located on track to meeting its goals. So the blue portion of the graphic represents the first portion of the carbon neutrality initiative for 2025, focused on scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, while the gold portion encompasses the second portion of the initiative for 2050, focused on scope 3 emissions. So on this slide, we wanted to highlight this graphic from the same report that shows where the UC Berkeley campus lies on its carbon neutrality path. So as you can see, we need to make radical changes to meet our goals.
And now we will look into our own UC Berkeley campus energy system. Over 90% of campus energy is powered by an on-site cogeneration natural gas plant, which generates electricity from the burning of natural gas and utilizes the steam left over from the electricity generation to produce heat. UC Berkeley used to procure energy from a local utility, PG&E, but beginning in 2017, UC Berkeley has been producing its own electricity from the Cogen. The plant emits about 131,000 tons of CO2 per year. UC Berkeley's Cogen is older than many of the other UC's Cogens and is nearing the end of its life cycle, which provides the opportunity to convert to a more sustainable energy system and to lead the other UCs in doing so. The Cogen is located on the southwest corner of campus, near Haas Pavilion. It is marked on the map with a yellow star. A lot of students and UC community members pass it every day without knowing what it is or recognizing its importance in campus operations and our carbon footprint. Another defining characteristic of it that people often recognize is the steam that comes out of the building.
Recently, the University of California and its members have taken big strides in climate action. Just last fall, the University of California officially declared a climate emergency, the same week that over 1,000 UC community members rallied on Sproul Plaza, calling for climate action in coordination with the global climate strike. Last semester, the UC officially finalized its divestment from fossil fuels after a years-long student-initiated campaign that was also endorsed by the academic senate. In keeping with this momentum and embracing the leadership role the UC has, addressing our campus's energy system seems to be the next step in climate action. And UC Berkeley in particular has the opportunity to lead the way amongst the other UCs and have our work serve as a blueprint and inspiration for other campuses and institutions beyond the UC system. This event was created with the intention of bringing more awareness to students so we can serve as informed, active agents in the transition to a more sustainable energy system. And now we will move towards our next segment of the event, our moderated panel between our three guests that we are fortunate to have with us tonight. The format of this section will operate as such. We have 3 prepared questions for all of our panelists, and if our audience has any questions at this time, please save them for the audience Q&A portion that will follow this moderated panel.
So the first question we have for our panelists is, what do you envision for a more sustainable replacement for the Cogen gas plant? And what steps/measures do you see as most important in achieving this replacement? So we're inviting Kira to start off this panel discussion, and we'll have around 4 minutes each to answer the questions.
Great. Well, thank you again for having me and for putting this forum on, and for a really fantastic introduction that kind of lays the groundwork of where we're at today. So I'm going to just share a little bit around the carbon neutrality initiative, some of the climate action focus that we have on the Berkeley campus and with UC, and then I think Sally can definitely kind of dig in and offer you some more details on the energy system and the cogeneration plant itself. So you set a really great kind of foundation about our targets. You know, the UC Berkeley campus has been pretty active in climate action initiatives. for the last 15 years. In some cases, many more years than that. We've had an energy efficiency program on and off, but mostly on for 40 years on campus. We've done a lot around reducing the impacts of our transportation from the commute over the years. We've seen many more people today not driving, but choosing active transportation or other sustainable transportation options for their commutes. Over the years, the campus has has focused on housing for students within walking distance, which has also been kind of key in keeping the transportation impacts down. And so kind of the combination of transportation and energy efficiency, we've managed to, reduce our emissions over time by about, 15 to 30%, depending on the year. The other piece that's been really key for us in reducing our carbon impacts has been being able to procure electricity from the utilities and now more recently from the East Bay Community Choice option, East Bay Community Energy, and also through a wholesale power program that the University of California system runs. What that has allowed us to do is to be able to buy 100% clean electricity, which is what we've pivoted to in those accounts where we can purchase them. But as your presentation shows, kind of the elephant in the room is the cogeneration plant and the natural gas that's being burnt in that plant, and that we are now using the electricity from that plant. So, I think the next, as we kind of look at our carbon footprint for the campus, really looking at where we can make the real inroads in our campus operations and reducing the carbon impacts is through a replacement of the cogeneration plant. Why haven't we done it yet? I think that this group will be able to discuss that more. It's a big undertaking. It's got capital and ongoing costs that we have to consider. There's some competing interests. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about the challenges later, so I'll save that. But kind of pivoting to why we should do it, the opportunity is here now for us to look at making that leap to an electrified and decarbonized energy system for the campus. I think there's some really great opportunities for us as Berkeley to provide leadership around what a decarbonized energy system could look like, how it could not only serve us, but maybe be part of community resiliency. And it's also a fantastic opportunity for us to create some living lab opportunities for our research and for our students' student learning.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kira, for your insights and highlighting both the ups and downs in our process of becoming more energy efficient. Moving on, we'd like to hear the insights of David.
Great, and thank you for having me here. So as a climate scientist, I have to start with a little bit of context because I think that helps us understand where things need to go. I think that often people get the sense that global warming is a very complicated issue. You hear about CFCs from our refrigerants, you hear about nitrous oxide from agriculture or methane from cows or black carbon from incomplete combustion. And so it sounds like there are so many different things that are causing the problem and it just sounds overwhelming. But if we take a step back, carbon dioxide, which is produced by burning coal, oil and gas, fossil fuels, is responsible by far for most of the warming on the planet today. And also, just as importantly, it lasts the longest in the atmosphere. So 1,000 years from now, people will not care about the CFCs we emitted. They will not care about the methane we emitted. They will not care about the nitrous oxide. They'll not care about our black carbon, because that stuff will be gone. But the CO2, that will still be in the atmosphere and it will still be roasting the planet. So that's really what we need to deal with. If you can deal with that, you've tackled 80% of the problem. So to get rid of the CO2 emissions that we are currently putting out into the atmosphere at a record pace, and aside from COVID, that pace is accelerating. What we need to do are two things. We need to decarbonize the grid and electrify everything. So decarbonize the grid means you take generation sources of electricity that burn coal or gas, so emit CO2, you take them off the grid. And so you replace them with things like wind and solar and geothermal and hydro, nuclear if you want it. And that's in the realm of industry, the electric utilities, and government. But then everyone else, all the consumers, including you and me and your parents and UC Berkeley, they need to electrify everything. And that means that they need to take all of their energy in the form of electricity. And the reason for that is because all of the non-CO2 emitting sources of energy, with this one small exception that's not up to the task of providing the power we need, they all generate electricity: wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, nuclear. It's all generating electricity. So when we consume energy, it can't be in the form of a gaseous or liquid or solid fuel. It has to be in the form of electrons. So that's what needs to happen. And what does that mean for the tangible world around us? Electrify everything means that we have to, well, let's see, the lights here or the refrigerator, check. We've done that. They're already electrified, so no problem there. But what other ways do we use energy? Well, we have transportation. We've got vehicles. We've got cars and trucks that currently overwhelmingly burn gasoline and diesel, both generated from oil. So we need to switch those to electric vehicles. And this is underway, but not proceeding fast enough. But if we think about UC Berkeley and what its emissions are, where they come from, its vehicle fleet and its buses, I mean, they do contribute and they should be electrified, but they are a relatively small part of UC Berkeley's emissions. The biggest piece of the emissions for campus comes from the fact that we are burning gas. And we're burning gas for two reasons. One, to generate our own electricity instead of buying it from the grid, which is much cleaner because the California grid has all these wonderful things on it, like wind and solar and hydro. So that's one. And the other is for heating and actually cooling. So they make steam, and the steam goes to the buildings to provide heating, and kind of confusingly, but it works out. You can also cool with that. So it's the heating piece that's the sticky bit. You can switch over to the grid and run all your electrical devices off the cleaner California grid, but we need to replace the heating. And the way to do that is with a heat pump. A heat pump is just like an air conditioner that you might put in your window. It simply moves heat from one place to another. You can move heat into a room if it's too cold. You can move heat out in the summer if the room's too hot. And those run on electricity, and they're very efficient. So electrification for UC Berkeley means, I mean, if I really want to boil it down and be crude, it means heat pumps, heat pumps, heat pumps, heat pumps. And I imagine Sally will talk a little something about those and what might be entailed in setting them up.
Yeah, thank you, David. You provide a very clear perspective on where our focus is going to be. So Sally, feel free to round off this question.
Okay, and I echo everyone in thanking you for having us and letting us have this conversation and share more about what we've been doing, because we've been working on this for quite a long time. So I'll give a little background on how we got to where we are today and what the history of the plant is, and then talk a bit about what we hope to do going forward. So we have had a cogen plant since the late 80s. And for the first 30 years or so of its existence, it was owned and operated by a third party. That was the arrangement they set up when they created the plant. Prior to that, prior to the 80s, it was simply a boiler plant and we procured electricity from the grid. Cogen at the time was state of the art. It was cost effective and reliable, and UC Berkeley was actually the first to create a cogen plant. So it was a good thing at the time, but obviously is no longer appropriate. In the way it worked previously is, as I said, it was owned and operated by a third party. They actually had a land lease, and that portion of the campus belonged to them. And the campus itself had no say or role in operating that plant. And they created the electricity and they sold it to PG&E and gave us the steam, which is a byproduct. And then we, at the same time, bought our electricity from PG&E. So the plant has always been there producing electricity. It was just sort of a contractual arrangement that made us buy the electricity. So the lease ended in about 2015, or 2017, I'm sorry, but we knew this was coming, so we started studying this in 2015 to try to be ready for that transition, because we knew it was a major transition for the campus. And at the time, we were focused on the fact that the plant is old, and as everyone has said, that offered an opportunity, and we wanted to make sure that we met that opportunity. So we studied our different options for replacing the plant at the same time that we were negotiating the contract with the operator to make sure that we maintained services for the campus. At that time, PG&E stopped writing contracts where they bought electricity from plants like this. So we had to start using the electricity from the plant. So I just want to make it clear that was not an option. We recognized the impact that had on the campus's carbon footprint, but there really was no choice about it. So we aimed for a transition. We've been studying it since 2015. When we first started looking at it, the study was much more focused on how to provide reliable service. We knew there was a carbon reduction opportunity there, but the 5 years since 2015, the focus and the intensity of the need to transition these things quickly has just dramatically changed. So the conversations then were about cost effectiveness and making sure, what was the simplest way to do it. And we've come a long way now to where we recognize the priority of achieving carbon neutrality. So our most recent study has been focused on electrification, as David mentioned. And the solution that we've arrived at after a lot of study is to create heat pump plants, nodal heat pump plants that serve portions of the campus where we have a balanced heating cooling load. So these are really technical corners of campus around the engineering core and around sort of Koshland Barker, where the heat pump technology really offers a lot of opportunity. The plan now is to put those quadrants, sort of the north edge of campus, on these nodal plants and maintain, for now, and as a short-term thing, the cogeneration plant for the south side of campus. And that's become a priority because of the PSPS events last year, where we, before those, didn't actually believe we would ever be cut off from a utility, and were rather rudely, taught that actually could happen. And the cogeneration plant was a lifesaver, literally, for some of our researchers and the animals in the buildings. So we are very concerned about campus resiliency. So the goal now is to keep the plant on the south side for a while, until we have a better way to provide resiliency at the same time as we transition away from natural gas. Even doing that, even putting the north side of campus on these nodal heat pump systems and maintaining cogeneration for the south, dramatically reduces our carbon footprint. It's very, to the point where we are no longer under the cap or required to meet the cap and trade requirements. So it would take us a very long way toward where we need to go while providing resiliency. But again, that's a relatively, we intend to transition the south side away as well. So we're looking at that. And then also looking at what other technologies we can do for generating our own electricity, such as solar on the hill. So I know that was abrupt. I think I've reached my limit. So I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you for those great points about the history, Sally. Next, we're going to go into question 2. What are the limitations or obstacles facing the campus in its transition to a more sustainable energy system? David, can you please start us off?
Certainly. So I think there are a variety of different obstacles that are kind of obvious. The first is a financial obstacle. There's no pot of money that is sitting around that people have been adding to carefully and diligently over decades to prepare for the replacement of this plant. Or maybe Sally can correct me if I'm wrong, if she knows of a secret pot of cash somewhere. She's shaking her head no. So that is an obstacle. That means that we need funding through legislation at the state or federal level, or we need to borrow to make that happen. So that's one obstacle. Another obvious obstacle is that there's some technical issues. Again, Sally can speak to those better than I can, but there's the question of whether we can pull enough amps through the substation that feeds electricity from the grid to campus. Or one thing I didn't mention with heat pumps is that you sometimes want to even out your use of electricity and store thermal energy, store heat and cold. Cold is the absence of thermal energy in water tanks. But those tanks can be big. And so where do you site those tanks on or near campus? And then there are obstacles that are, or considerations that are a combination of financial and technical, such as how much money to spend on what amount of resiliency, with resiliency, as Sally mentioned, being this fancy word for keeping essential pieces running when the overall grid goes down. So what kind of microgrid with, say, photovoltaics and batteries do we establish here on campus to make sure that we can keep not everything running, but the absolute critical things running when the overall grid is not available? But I think actually the biggest obstacle is just a lack of awareness, honestly. Sally and Kira, they both want to electrify this campus. And I think anyone who's thought deeply about this issue over the past few years, and there's a number of them, I think they all want to electrify this campus, but that in and of itself is not enough, because we have to overcome financial obstacles and others and decide how to balance things in light of our values. So if UC leadership is not thinking about this issue, if students aren't thinking about it and asking for electrification, if the regents aren't aware and thinking about it, if the legislature and the governor aren't thinking about it, I don't think it happens. So it's really essential that we get engagement from everyone, that awareness is raised, and that's why events like this are a great starting point to head in that direction.
Thank you for those great points about awareness. I think that's definitely crucial in order to move on from any unsustainable energy that we have been using for a long time. Next, we'll move on to Sally. So would you like to continue?
Yeah, I think my sense of the obstacles is very similar. The campus itself is complex physically. Our utility infrastructure is complex, and the sheer difficulty of doing this work and replacing these systems is is daunting. If you ever look at a utility map for the campus, it's spaghetti. Every inch of our pathways and our roads is filled currently with the existing piping. The connections to the buildings are going to be complex. The scale of this is vast. And then you have the additional, so that's for the steam and the connections on the core campus. The requirement to upgrade our entire high voltage delivery system from PG&E, from the Hill substation where it lands, down onto campus so that we have sufficient capacity to electrify our campus is huge. And so it's just, land is scarce, the plants are big, the tanks are big. This is a big big project. And that's just, you know, at some point, every single one of those questions is going to have to be answered. And that's good. I hope to be here for it, and I'm looking forward to the challenge, but there is no way to underestimate the complexity of this issue. And so that comes to funding. If you think about how difficult this is going to be, it is going to require a lot of money, and money is scarce, and there are competing priorities. So we have been looking for years now at stimulus funding, infrastructure grants, philanthropy, which I have to say did not seem like a possibility earlier when people were less focused on it, and increasingly seems like a realistic way to fund at least a portion of this. Kira and I have met with our representatives, our state representatives. We're about to meet with our congressional representative to see if we can move this along. So funding is the fundamental issue. But similarly to David, I think a big challenge is just inertia. Pushing this big a deal along in the face of the competing priorities, like the need to seismically upgrade our campus, the need to provide housing for students. There are so many competing concerns. And I know leadership is trying, and I have spoken to as many people as we can about them, and they understand it, but I'm not sure it sticks, given how difficult so many things are right now. And so just keeping the awareness that we're at a crisis point that has to be dealt with in front of the people, in front of the people who need to make the decision is difficult. So those are my small obstacles to getting this done.
Would it be okay if I jumped in just for a second? And because I feel like Sally and I have both harped on obstacles, but I think it's also worth pointing out that, you know, what is possible. And it absolutely is possible to fully electrify our campus. We can do that with the technology we have today. And, you know, if you want to find a really good example, and you want another reason, if global warming or, our reputation in the world isn't enough, you want another reason to feel some fire under your butt, one of the best examples of an electrified campus is just down south of us at Stanford. Stanford shut down its gas plant. In fact, it physically demolished the gas plant, which I kind of picture as one of these wonderful moments with students coming up with pickaxes, like tearing down the Berlin Wall, but it probably wasn't like that. But they did it, and it's now an electric campus. And not only that, but they did it in part because it saved them money. They had the advantage that they could put up the capital up front, but they said this had the lowest life cycle cost of any of the options that were available to them. And they estimate it's going to save Stanford about $500 million with a B. So this is very, very possible.
Okay, that was great. Sally, did you have anything more to add?
Well, just to chime in on the, not being entirely negative about this, it is possible. And the level of engagement and potential that we see, Kira and I speak to people about this all the time, and the conversation has shifted, the level of engagement has shifted, the level of enthusiasm has shifted. So I do think I would have said a few years ago that it was kind of hopeless, and I really don't feel that anymore. So I'm excited that we seem to be able to move this along.
Okay, Kira, do you have anything more to add about limitations or obstacles?
I think that both David and Sally hit on, really important points. Just a few things I would add to the thinking here in terms of obstacles. When we talk about costs, we're talking both about what is it going to cost in capital to get this project done, and then what is it going to cost over the lifetime of this plant. And, when you start looking at the life cycle of doing an electrified system and building it out over years with new renewable technologies as they become available, and you really take a serious look at the cost of carbon and the social cost of carbon, and you put that into your financial model. and you understand that extracting fossil fuels and burning them and the cost of natural gas is not going to be cheap in the future. And all of these things that you try to, you try to envision your future out 30, 50 years and what these costs are going to be, you really start looking at what David was getting at, that over time, these electrified systems are going to could very well cost us significantly less than a reinvestment in burning fossil fuels on this campus. And there's so much momentum. It's not just here on campus. The state is electrifying. Hopefully the country is going to electrify. And so while, in the short run, moving to an electrified system is and having to buy more electricity will probably cost the campus more money in the early years than the natural gas. We'll see there's probably going to be a pivot in the future, and there's going to be a lot more renewable electricity to purchase in the financial model. I think just at some things to think about in terms of constraints. There's competing interests, certainly financially. Land on campus and what we do with the land on campus. We need, I think it's 52,000 square feet or something like that, Sally, for the plants on the north side. And we need thermal storage tanks. And so the campus also has to say, this is important. It may mean that a building's a little bit smaller, or we have to spend more money to put this plant in underground, or whatever that might be. But we need commitments from the campus for using the land. And just knowing who we are as a Berkeley campus. I mean, we're a very built out campus. We're in a large urban area. We're not Davis, we're not Merced, we're not Riverside, where we have land where we can build easily renewable energy to kind of feed our system. So we have to be really creative. And the good thing is we can be really creative. We already have this really fantastic foundation, actually, because of the cogeneration plant, that we already are running a system, and we're already running a microgrid. We're already running a microgrid, but it's being run on fossil fuels right now. So this transition of being able to have this potentially very resilient energy system for the campus that can serve us, can serve us in outages, potentially can serve our community if we're able to find ways to move the electricity back and forth on times when we're not using it. Maybe it benefits the community. So, the endless opportunities are so much more exciting than constraints it's, like Sally said, I want to see this happen. I want to see this happen. We want to see this built in 8 years from now, if we can find the financing.
Well, thank you everyone for your answers for that question. I think that was really enlightening about some of the obstacles that we're facing. We'll now go ahead and move on to our third and final question, which was touched upon slightly about the importance of engagement in this process. And as a reminder to the audience, we are going to have a Q&A session after this question. So please make sure you're thinking of any questions you might have, and you can also write them in a chat to one of the 4 student moderators who've been speaking, and we can go ahead and ask that for you. But for question 3, I'll go ahead and direct it to Sally first. But where is there opportunity for student involvement and community collaboration with the energy system? What actions can students take to achieve a sustainable energy system more quickly?
I think fundamentally keeping the pressure on and keeping this in front of leadership and in front of decision makers is the most important thing. I don't know specifically the best way to do that. I think the things that I have seen so far have been very effective. And I've seen the result of the advocacy that people are doing and in the level of attention and engagement around this. So keeping that up is critical. what Kira and I want to do with this is as we really start to develop the technical solutions to this and make the land use decisions around this, engagement with faculty and students to make sure that we are considering everything we need to consider and choosing the right approach. We want to make sure that we have that. We cannot do this in isolation. This is too important and too complex. So we will need everyone's help, considering our options and making sure that we're doing this right, because it's a big deal.
Thank you very much. And Kira, can you go ahead and give us your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree. I'm keeping the pressure on. Certainly is one of the pieces. I've been thinking about this a little bit, and I really think if students can really tell their story and their narrative about why this is important to them and why it's important to the institution, I think it will be really meaningful. I think that we have a lot of, there's advocacy and understanding in this institution that, climate change is real and we need to take action. I mean, that hasn't necessarily translated to action on the campus itself, but, we're not pushing against, an institution that's not sure climate change is real or it's too far off in the future. So we have that to our advantage. But I think, why is it important, why is it important to you as a student that our institution is, reflects, what your future and what you're studying and what we should be researching. And I think students have a really quite amazing influence and avenue to talk to faculty about this and why it's important and how it could be important to your learning. I mean, there's also this really cool opportunity with the system to create some really interesting living lab learning opportunities kind of across this. So, why is that important? When you look back and you're alum from Berkeley, what do you know when you look back in 10 years, where do you want to see your campus, and is this important if you're an alum and you're, part of the philanthropy machine, is it going to make a difference to you on your contributions to Berkeley as an alum if, we haven't decarbonized our energy system? So, I think that there's a lot of tools in the student toolkit to, really have this influence. I also think, and I know that you've already started this process has already started, but, find your ways to share that interest and that story with campus leadership. Some of that conversation started, but just keep it going. There's a little bit of structure. We are talking about this right now. We have done presentations and are engaging the Chancellor's Advisory Committee on Sustainability on this. There's student representatives, there's representatives from ASUC and the Graduate Assembly. I certainly think talking to your student advocates and engaging with CACs is an important piece of what we can do. And I think one of the things Sally and I can talk about also is as we get into this kind of more of the shovel-ready planning, taking this concept and turning it into something that can then be designed and constructed. I think there might be, there could be some really interesting opportunities to kind of help with some of the analysis and some of the focus group work that we might have to do. And then I'm just going to finish because I'm probably I've passed my 4 minutes. But keep us on our toes. We're thinking about the financial pieces. We're thinking about the technical pieces. you know, keep us on our toes thinking about the social sustainability issues that are kind of so important and tied to this.
Thank you for that, Kira. As students, I'm sure we all appreciate those points you brought up. And moving on to David, you touched about the importance of engagement in the last question. So please provide your thoughts with that.
Yeah, well, I can tell you that I moved to this campus in 2011, moved across country to join the faculty here. And I had gotten into the field of climate science because I was worried about our future climate. And, you know, I had my new faculty job here, and I knew about the reputation of UC Berkeley students and their engagement with issues and their activism and fighting for what is just and right. And I was excited to be kind of surrounded by that. And I got here in 2011, and frankly, I was kind of underwhelmed by the degree of activism regarding climate on this campus at the time. To be fair, there were plenty of people working on issues of climate, but the campus as a whole didn't seem fully engaged in it. And that continued for some number of years until I think last year. Last year, there was a bit of a change. We had Greta Thunberg, we had the Sunrise Movement, we had the Green New Deal, we had climate strikes. And there was this new energy and new enthusiasm. And it's, you know, for someone who's been worried about this issue and working on it in my own way for some number of years, is really exciting to see. But I do think there's been a bit of a lack of focus. I hear some students talking about, in the context of climate, talking about, say, plastic straws. And, well, plastic straws are bad for marine life, to be sure, but they're irrelevant for climate. Or I hear people talking about Pepsi, and Pepsi is no doubt bad for your health, but it's not really a climate issue. And, you know, I think if we want to make a change, it's really helpful to begin with what we're doing. And part of us as members of the UC Berkeley community is this gas plant responsible for 90% of the carbon emissions on this campus. And if you calculate out the number, the tons of CO2 every year, it's a large number. You gave it before, some maybe 130,000 tons of CO2 per year. And then you take all of the people who study at or work at UC Berkeley and divide up those tons of CO2. It's tons of CO2 every year for me, and then more tons of CO2 per year for you. I mean, this is gases being burned on your behalf, on my behalf. And we all have a responsibility, I think, to be engaged in seeing that doesn't get locked in for decades to come with a new gas plant, and that we also transition as rapidly as possible to full electrification of campus. So there are ways to get plugged in. I mean, there's recently, just last month, many of you are aware, there's a UC-wide petition that was signed by thousands of members of UC. It was endorsed by unions that represent over 50,000 people at UC. And that petition calls for real decarbonization, electrification of the campuses at UC, and to set aside the kind of funny accounting business of offsets and say, no, let's actually reduce our own CO2 emissions to get on a path to where we and the world needs to be very soon. So several of us on campus here, students, staff, faculty, met with Chancellor Chris just early this month, and Kira and Sally were there as well. And we presented that petition to the Chancellor and asked for a few things. We asked for a commitment to make a detailed, shovel-ready, as Kira says, plan for electrification of campus. And we asked for public release of the reports that have detailed the work that Sally and others have done over the past few years, thinking about different options so that we can have sunshine and just general discussion on campus about where things are headed and what the obstacles are. And regular dialogue like this event here, which is great. So that's moving along, but it is not led by any one person. It's just an amorphous network of people who are interested and engaged on this issue. and there's so much to do. We need to, you've heard Sally and Kira both tell you, we need you to put pressure on us, public pressure on us and public pressure on the other administrators, make the issue public, make it aware, be sustained, because that's the only way that we're going to make this work. And so that means things like signing petitions, it means organizing, it means raising awareness, educating yourself and others. It means reaching out to the regents or writing op-eds, all manner of potential things. And like I said, there's a growing network of people who are interested. And so you can reach out to any number of the people. You can certainly send me an email and I can put you in touch with people. You can reach out to Kira, you can reach out to Tess Gautier on here, who's been working on this for a while. So I think there are many ways to get plugged in, and many ways in which we need everyone's ideas as well as to how to keep the focus on this.
Can I add one thing before we stop this, move on to the Q&A? I know we're saying keep the pressure on, but as we've talked, I want to clarify something. Pressure alone isn't going to be enough. What has to be articulated is why this, because the campus is facing so many conflicting priorities, and they're all real and they're all important to the students, and the leadership cares. They're not ignoring this, but at the same time that they're looking at this plant, they're looking at housing, which is of great interest to the students and great importance to the day-to-day life of the students who come here, and seismic. Those are the three big costs facing the campus, and they are all in the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. They can't do it all. And so it isn't just enough to say, do this. You have to say, why this, over the other equally valid issues that they need to address. And so that's just, as you think about advocacy and as you think about putting the pressure on, you have to be able to say why this is the most important thing, and not underestimate how critical the other pressures are going to be on the campus to spend that money elsewhere.
Yeah, and if I could just really quickly add to that, because it's a really good point. There's an opportunity this year. The campus is doing a campus master plan. It's a good place to look at, where the competing interests are in terms of our physical environment, and then being able to articulate, to us, this is more important than this one more building that has to be done, or because when you put it in perspective in capital costs, this plant, this energy system we're talking about is about the same cost as a really huge building we would build. So it's like one building or a whole energy system that's decarbonized and serve the campus. And then also just thinking about, as we recover out of the pandemic, there are a lot of opportunities to rethink about how we operate. I mean, we're all doing this online Zoom right now. You've been doing classes online. We may do some indefinite working at home. Are there some solutions that kind of help us save money in other areas so that we can invest in this? And I think that as students, that's one of the areas you can articulate what you're willing or what you think those compromises would be for you.
Thank you to the panelists for all your insights. I'm really glad that we were able to have some back and forth discussion on those points. We'll now go ahead and transition to our audience Q&A section. For this portion, we encourage all questions, and if you would like to ask a question, please feel free to use the raised hand feature in your participants tab. If you would like to ask a question but would prefer not to do it over Zoom, please message your question to any one of the 4 moderators who have been speaking, and we'll go ahead and ask it for you. And we have about 10 minutes left to ask any questions, so please feel free. And then let me pull this up. Lane, go ahead and unmute yourself if you'd like.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for doing this.
I was interested in hearing about the timeline for implementing or like removing the cogen plant and implementing the heating pumps. I know there was in the campus sustainability plan, it was talking about 100% renewable energy by 2050, and that timeline seems a little out there, and it'd be better to have a more rapid transition. So I was interested to hear about that.
I can start that. We, as Kira said, we are hoping to have the new plants built in 7 to 8 years. That assumes that we are able to find funding within the next, I think, year and a half. And that gives us a couple of years of design development and then several years to construct. So that's sort of the most honestly optimistic timeline, but it also still seems a little longer than we would like, but realistically, that's the duration for all 3 of those phases.
Would any of the other panelists like to answer that?
I guess I'd just like to chime in and say that I know that to an undergraduate, being told that something's going to take 8 years makes it sound like an issue that you can't possibly work on, and that you can't, it's just, you know, it feels hopeless. And I think, you know, even if it does take 8 years, and 8 years would be a pity, based on how rapidly we need to be transitioning off of fossil fuels, and the burden that's upon the rich nations to be transitioning off because we are responsible for most of the historical emissions, right? But even if it does take 8 years, it will, again, only happen in those 8 years if everyone's engaged at every stage of the process. So if, if in the next 2 years, Sally is successful in drawing up those shovel-ready plans for electrification, it will be in part because of everyone's involvement here. So there are wins along the way for us to celebrate.
And I would just say, finishing that, getting a shovel-ready plan done, and having that outcome be that there's a commitment to actually, to do the shovel-ready plan means there's a commitment to move it forward, and that is, certainly something that can be done in the shorter run. So.
All right, well, thank you very much. Another audience member has raised their hand. Dante, go ahead and unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Hey all, thank you so much to the organizers and the panelists tonight. This was a great event. I did have one question, and I think a perfect segue from what David just said. How will y'all, the administrators that get paid to do this, the people that are in the CACS meetings, the energy folks, the people who have positions of power and platform, how will y'all be interacting and bringing in undergraduates and graduates into these spaces? I know this because I was a student on CACS. I was the select undergraduate at the LRDP plans as well too. Very secret spaces, very not transparent, and a lot of stuff that is not being decisively boiled down to the rest of the undergraduate and graduate bodies as well too. So how will you be incorporating into your strategic goals better outreach and communication with graduates and undergraduates?
Kira, see, I was going to leave this to Kira since this is much more her area of expertise. But
Hi, Dante. Thanks for the question, and I know that your participation in previous years on this, and your work as a carbon neutrality fellow as well. I think. I think you're right. I think what we're starting to do now is emerge out of kind of a quiet phase of this planning, and really wanting to engage much more deeply with the campus community. So, and I think that that's something that has just been happening over the last 6 months. we've been talking, I think we've probably had conversations one-on-one with, probably over 20 faculty. We were here tonight. I posted in the chat a more kind of in-depth discussion or presentation we're going to offer on December 8th, where we'll really have a chance to kind of share a little bit more detail about these heat pump plants, what it looks like, some of the carbon savings. We're doing some work right now to kind of turn it into what they call kind of a real project. So there's some process you have to do on campus where it becomes a project that then is listed. So we're trying to kind of pull it into that more official phase. And I think something that we haven't, we've talked to actually the chair and the vice chair of the academic senate. There was excitement around the project there. And I think that there's another piece to it in terms of, another, I don't want to call it a governance structure, but some sort of structure that we are going to need to build into this in order to keep the input coming in and decisions flowing to decision makers through that, more so than what we've had to date. And I think, I think we're also going to be particularly motivated around building this out in anticipation that possibly there's going to be federal or state stimulus funding for infrastructure, and this could be one of those projects that might be a shining example. So yeah, so I think we'll see a lot more of what you didn't see in the next 6 months.
I'd like to follow up on that, if I may, and ask Dante, what information would you like to see? So, I mean, we're certainly happy to share what we've done so far, and that is a genuine question, because we can do this. But is just knowing that this is happening the right level of information, or are there other things that we should be considering as the information we need to get out there to make this more effective and to allow people to be more engaged?
Yeah, well, to answer that, I think the very first thing is y'all just need to know where to find students. I was in the LRDP meetings and I was saying acronyms and organizations that no one knew what the hell they were. And these are people that are getting, full-blown salaries and they don't know their own campus. It is the ivory tower of administration. The bureaucracy is built that way. And so I do encourage you to think of ways that you can interact with students, because it's not just Kira's job. It should be everybody's job. Everybody should have a pathway. David, I believe you're a professor as well too, knowing where students are found and how you can directly interact with them. I think very much there should be broader public town halls around the LRDP plans. I think it shouldn't be devoted to just having undergraduate representatives. I think you should have more transparency into the phases of what is going on. I think that there should be general comm from Office of Sustainability about the process of where y'all are at with the Cogen system. I think a lot of just outward transparency. And then also, we always look to Serc, we always look to the people in CACs and stuff like that. But even just the people in CACs don't have the full connections. Pour Out Pepsi campaign, it is linked to climate change. It is linked directly towards, our efforts, our emissions towards scope 3 and food and ag, very intersectional as well too. And I do think that when you do bring students in, you provide a position that is not in that room always. And I think it does naturally bring in stuff. So I think you should advertise all these meetings. I think there definitely should be. I know Office of Sustainability is doing great work with, increasing these, and Carbon Crew and Serc is doing great work as well too, but just increase the transparency into it. There needs to be a mirror into this process, because a lot of folks just know it at face value and that's about it.
I'm going to go ahead and interrupt slightly. I'm sure this is a discussion that could go on for a very long time, and hopefully it is taken into consideration as the process moves forward. We do have one final slide that we'd like to end on since we are at time. Tess, would you like to go ahead and speak to this?
Sure, okay. Thank you. Yeah, we just wanted to say thank you to all of our panelists and to all of the folks who came out here tonight, and we just wanted to share some resources and some ways to stay involved. So we recommend that folks follow our Serc social media and join our environmental community at Cal Slack for opportunities to get involved and for future events and updates on this campaign. And we will make sure to send a follow-up email to all of our participants with the event recording, presentation, and with links to the resources that we mentioned above. And we want to give a shout out to an upcoming related event hosted by the Office of Sustainability. I believe Kira dropped the information in the chat, and you can find this on Facebook as well as the event registration. But yeah, we just again wanted to say thank you. Hopefully this is kind of really the start for, you know, a greater movement. As David mentioned, there really is like a UC-wide coalition in the works, and a lot of people passionate about this, and this event is definitely a really essential and helpful tool and resource that we can share with all those folks who are eager to get involved but kind of don't know how. So thank you again so much. Oh, and yes, I think, so sorry, Patrick, that we ran out of time. We just want to be considerate of everyone's schedules, but as Sally said, you can email your question to her.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity.
Great job organizing this.
Again, massive thank you to all of our panelists. It's been a great evening, and hopefully these conversations can continue. With that, we'll go ahead and bid the panelists good night. If there are any quick questions for the student moderators, feel free to hang out for the next couple of minutes. But otherwise, good night, everyone, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.